Keith Law, senior baseball writer for The Athletic. Keith, good morning. Joe Spadoni.
Can I apologize
alongside Joe Shasky. Apologize for what?
Last year around this time, they made the Devers trade, and you and we kind of got into it a little, and you know what? Looking a year later, like, you were probably right about Posey and the assessment of everything that he's going to put together, because right now this team is just, I mean, the roster construction is one aspect. How they're handling certain players is another aspect. The amount of money owed, the bullpen, the manager being inexperienced. It feels like a nightmare situation. And Keith, I just want to say, I want to man up and say, I was wrong, you were right, and I apologize.
Well, I appreciate that. He was just getting kind of canonized despite having absolutely no experience at any of this. And he's got great people under him. I mean, I think Zach Manassian is doing the best he can, certainly in the circumstances. I've known him for a really long time. Michael Holmes, the scouting director, is great. Kyle Haynes over in player development. They have great people there. I just don't think Buster has any kind of magic touch. That's this whole idea that Buster's going to save everything. And no, actually he is totally inexperienced for any front office job. And it has shown in a couple of these things, unfortunately. And I think that is at least part of why they're in the situation that they're in, from, making the Devers trade to, hiring a manager with absolutely no professional experience whatsoever. Tony Vitello is one of the best head coaches in college baseball. It's a very different game. It's a little bit of a different sport, but it's certainly a very different job managing anywhere in the pros versus managing in college. And I just look at a lot of these and say, this feels like Buster acting, showing his inexperience. That's the best way to put it.
Keith, what do you make of the Bryce Eldridge situation going on right now? Giants fans are pulling their hair out with this guy. They just want to see consistent at-bats for him. He gets 2 hits the other night on the first of these 3 games against the Diamondbacks, gets benched yesterday. It feels like Giants fans don't know what this team is doing. And then I see these quotes from Buster Posey. They want to get him consistent at-bats, but they're also saying they don't want to compromise the actual team when it comes to, trying to stack wins here. What have you made of this Bryce Eldridge call-up this season, and have they done right by Bryce at all?
Well, you can't necessarily have both. I mean, obviously, if he was coming up and hitting, right, if he was coming up and playing well right away, this wouldn't be an issue. But, this comes back to rushing him up the ladder 2 years ago and then rushing him to the majors last year in particular. And he really still has not solved, so to speak, some of the issues that he's had. It's just making contact against better stuff. That's really what it is. And either... the problem is they play AAA in the PCL, where a lot of your games, not all your games, but a lot of your games are played in great hitters environments, and that tends to skew a lot of the production. And so what you see with a lot of teams that have AAA affiliates in the PCL, you got to bring those guys to the majors and just sort of just wear it. You have to let them work on making those adjustments in the big leagues, and that means playing Eldridge close to every day. I might sit him against some better lefties. I think that's completely reasonable to do with any rookie. But accept that you're not going to get a lot of production out of that spot. Also, this team is probably not going to the playoffs this year, right? This is certainly a situation where you can just say, look, we are already looking to 2027, and we're going to try to play younger players. We're going to try to give opportunities to kids like Eldridge, and either it's letting them develop in a case like him, or in some other cases, it's sort of more of, hey, let's see what we've got and make some evaluations over the course of the entire season.
I mean, Keith, I love what you're saying, and I think most Giants fans want them to find a way to get him in the lineup. There seems to be an infield logjam right now. Devers and Casey have kind of shared duties at DH and first base. Arias has been awesome, and he's at second base, but he's on a 1-year deal.
Yeah. And
then you have Adames and Chapman on the other side at shortstop and third base, and they're under long-term deals. So how do they figure this out? Is there an odd man out in terms of a trade, or I don't even know what they do here, I guess is what I'm saying, because Casey's bat has got to play. He's been one of their best players.
Yeah, but he's not, right? He's 27. He is striking out, 6 times as often as he's walking. I mean, that's not the be-all and end-all, certainly, but you don't see a lot of productive major league hitters who are walking 4% of the time. I mean, this is not, and Schmidt isn't a rookie. It's not a kid. We have a lot of history with him. He's got power. We've known that. He's actually a pretty good defensive player on the left side of the infield, but They're full up over there. So you kind of got two options. One is you trade Arias, because like you said, he is on a 1-year deal. He's playing way better defense than anybody had any reason to expect. And I'm not totally sure that I think that's going to continue. But regardless, team's not going to the playoffs. Arias would have trade value right now, any point now through the trade deadline, but probably sooner. The other option is to sit Schmidt, make him, doesn't have to never play, but make him kind of the all-purpose backup and give Eldridge those at-bats. Eldridge is much more a part of the future than Schmidt is. And playing Schmidt because he's gotten off to a hot start is not the right thing, not just for Eldridge, but for the long-term future of this lineup.
Is there any world where they explore a deal for, Chapman or Adames? I mean, there are teams out there that are looking for solutions on that side of the infield. Obviously the Yankees and the Braves, and there's a lot of teams out there, but the price tag on these contracts is astronomical. Is that just a non-starter, a trade for either one of those guys?
I think so. I mean, it's not just the price tag, it's that they're not good, right? Both of these guys are playing terribly right now, and you're not going to get much of a return for a guy on a huge contract who is playing poorly, and where the long-term outlook is not great on either of those. I think Chapman in particular, I think that contract is kind of unmovable. Adames, I expect him to play better, but he's been worse. He's been much worse at the plate. He's looked completely overmatched for a large portion of this season. And so I don't see any scenario where they're able to move either of those contracts. And I don't think they're going to bench them. Benching Adames doesn't actually accomplish anything anyway. He's the only shortstop, really competent shortstop that they have. So that's not really an option either.
Keith Law joining us here on the River Islands guest line, senior baseball writer for The Athletic, very tapped in on all things minor league systems as well, farm systems. And speaking of the Giants farm, how much has the farm improved under Buster? Obviously, Giants fans have been longing for a top prospect to kind of break through really kind of since Buster, Crawford, Belt, all those young guys from their World Series years. And they're hoping Bryce Eldridge could be that guy, Keith. That's why it's also so frustrating. They're waiting for that young guy. They thought maybe Bart. They thought maybe Luciano. What is the outlook right now when it comes to this farm system outside of Bryce?
Yeah, I like where the system is. I think they're actually doing better on the development side than they are on the some of the other sides, like player acquisition side, essentially, which would encompass trade. It would also encompass draft. It would also encompass international. And international, I think, has been the strongest of the three. I mean, they've got those two kids, Josue Gonzalez and Luis Hernandez, who are tearing it up in the ACL right now. Josue keeps getting, multiple people from other clubs have said to me, it's the Francisco Lindor kind of starter kit, right? You don't want to say he is going to be Francisco Lindor, but that there are a lot of similarities there. And that Hernandez, the consistent reports are that this kid can really hit. He might play shortstop. He's definitely going to play somewhere on the infield. I like seeing the Gavin Killen, their first-round pick last year, who I really liked. I think he had kind of a slow start, but he's playing much better at this point. I'm also hearing from folks who cover the Giants system that they're seeing more improvements for players in the system, right? That was a big thing under multiple previous regimes where guys came in and didn't actually make improvements. You just weren't seeing the kind of individual player development that the best clubs are all doing now. And that is something I think that with the change that I mentioned Kyle Haynes earlier in player development, he and his group have been able to do a lot more. So I'm more optimistic that you'll continue to see improvement from players already in the system. So overall, I think the system is heading in the right direction. Eldridge is a little bit of a special case because his development or non-development, a lot of that happened before the regime change. He never should have been pushed to AAA back in, 2024? And I think you are still, to some extent, paying a little bit of a price for that, for him being rushed. The same thing happened to Luciano. I just saw Luciano in AA about 2 weeks ago. He's in the Yankees system. Well, now he's in AAA, but he was in AA when I saw him. And hey, he can really hit AA pitching. That's not what you're looking for. And he still kind of looks like a guy who was just mishandled. And I think, he's barely been in AAA, but I think we're going to run into the same issues. He's going to hit it hard when he hits it, and he's going to swing and miss a lot. And he may never pan out. I'm not saying that for Eldridge at all. I still have high hopes for Eldridge. But you're kind of trying to undo some of the mistakes that were made with him and get him back on a more appropriate development track, which I think at this point does mean, like you said earlier, consistent at-bats in the majors.
Yeah, I want to echo some more stuff. You didn't bring up Johnny Level. What's up with him? Is he highly touted? Because every day I see things retweeted about him. I mean, we're going low-level prospects here, so I apologize, Keith. But
yeah, that's fine.
This is your wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm. He's a high-level prospect. He's very good.
Okay.
He's my size. He's really small. And that, and I know he's hitting for power so far this year. He does hit the ball reasonably hard. The whole question with him, I mean, I'm dealing with it. There's a guy, Devin Fitzgerald, in the national system who plays, I'm pointing because he plays like 10 minutes from my house in Wilmington. It's the same thing. Do these power numbers hold up at higher levels against better quality pitching when the kids just aren't that big? They aren't that strong. Right? They aren't that physical. I do think Level is an everyday player because he can really hit. He does not strike out, controls the zone, understands the strike zone really well. He's going to play somewhere in the dirt. I don't think he's going to stick at shortstop. Also, they have Josue Gonzalez, so that obviates it. But I think Level ends up a really good offensive second baseman. The question of how good comes down to, does the power actually hold up? Most guys this size, he's listed at 5'8". I pulled it up. I think that's generous. Most guys that size don't end up hitting for a whole lot of power. You see exceptions. You get the Altuves every now and then, but Pedroia. Most of these guys end up just sort of middling power. Yes, Pedroia, who did it with a swing. He really he had a swing that was really geared to put the ball in the seats. I mean, he was one of the original lift and pull guys, honestly, pull the ball in the air. And a lot of people, myself included, thought, he can't hit like that, but he could. Yeah. Maybe Level ends up one of those guys. The odds are he ends up a lower power, high average, solid on base percentage second baseman who plays every day. So he's one of their better prospects for sure.
I like that. All right. So let's say, Buster came to you and Zach, and they said, all right, you see where we're at, and this continues for another month or so. What would their strategy be as they approach the deadline? They've got Robbie Ray, who, I know he hasn't looked as great the last couple of starts. He's one of the, better left-handed starting pitchers that might be available for a flyer at the deadline. And then you've got, obviously, Arias is on a one-year deal. Maybe one of these other contracts is desirable. If they came to you and they said, hey, what should we do as we approach the deadline? What would your blueprint for them be?
I think you outlined about 3/4 of it right there. I don't think those contracts, and I might throw Devers in there too, I don't think any of them are movable. Obviously, if somebody is interested, right, you can make it clear, we're willing to move those guys. We're willing to pay down some portions of the contract. We want players in return. We want prospects in return. But ultimately, the best moves for them are going to be things like trading Arias, trading Robbie Ray, trading anybody in the bullpen. I mean, you think we've really seen a trend the last couple of trade deadlines where teams are much more willing to trade younger bullpen pieces, because of the recognition that they don't last. They get hurt or they lose effectiveness. So if someone calls and says, we're interested in Keaton Winn, you say, Keaton Winn is 28 anyway, but it doesn't matter that he's got multiple years of control, right? You trade him and you might get multiple prospects in return because somebody wants the value that Keaton Winn delivers right now. We see way more that we saw Mason Miller return Leo DeVries, one of the absolute best prospects in baseball. So I think that's the other thing is you just have to be open. You say, we're willing to talk about just about anybody. If you get the right offer on pretty much anybody, you should be willing to trade them. You can't be too precious about the players you already have. It's just in terms of what's most likely, it's the guys you just mentioned because they're on expiring deals and are older and are clearly not a part of the next good Giants team.
Keith Law joining us here on the Morning Row, senior baseball writer for The Athletic, courtesy of the River Islands guest line. Would you consider it all, Keith, trading a guy like Logan Webb? Obviously, you would be selling low on him. This is probably his worst year. Obviously, the runner-up in the Cy Young, leading Major League Baseball in innings pitched the last couple seasons. He's been dynamic, and he's been a homegrown guy here, but he's going to be 30. He's got a couple years of control still if you trade for this contract. Is that something they should consider at all in the coming months?
Yeah, you should absolutely consider it. To me, it's everyone's available at the right price. There's no such thing as an untradeable player when you're selling. And really, and you're buying too, but we're talking about selling here. And ultimately, you look at Webb and I know he's on the IL right now and he's not having his best season, but he's been incredibly effective and durable. There's so much value in the innings that this guy provides. And I think a lot of teams, once he's back healthy, shows he's back to his usual self. I'm assuming he gets there at some point before the trade deadline. you're just open to it. You don't necessarily go into it say, we have to trade Logan Webb, because you don't. He's got 2 years of control left. You absolutely don't have to trade him right now. But you make it clear that you're open to the possibility, because starting pitchers like Webb do not become available very often. And the handful of times we've seen guys like that traded where they're more than a rental, they tend to get pretty good returns in terms of prospects or young big leaguers, right? I keep saying prospects. I'm also saying if you get a guy who's got 1 year in the big leagues, but who you think has a chance to be a real impact player, you do that too. The Giants don't have to be looking 5 years down the road. I don't think they're necessarily that far away from contention. That depends on how much they trade off the major league roster. But if they just trade off the periphery, there's a chance they could contend again in 2027. If they trade Logan Webb, if they trade Landon Roop, if they start looking at trading younger players with far more years of control, then it might be a longer term rebuild. And I don't know that they have any interest in doing that. All I would say is be open. Just make sure other teams are aware that you're willing to consider offers on everybody. You always have the option to say no.
I'm looking back at that Devers deal, which was just such a seminal moment, it feels like, for the team and for everyone. And I think a lot of the sting is off because of Boston's handling of Tibbs and Harrison, and now they're not with them. But both guys are performing. Like, both guys are performing really well. And so, yes, it's 2 teams removed or whatever. How does that trade, how is that viewed league-wide right now, that Devers move? Is it like, see, the Giants bought a lemon. We should have seen this coming. Rude moves.
How about both of those? I think there's truth in both of those statements. I think people look at the Devers deal, at the Devers particularly, referring to the contract and acquiring the contract, and say, Red Sox were right. He was headed for the cliff. It sure looks like he's over the cliff at this point. I'm not giving up on him permanently, but it's not good, obviously. It's a lot of money for negative production at this point. I think it's also fair to look at the Giants, and this would be more under the previous front office, not developing particularly Harrison, because they had him for a long time. They didn't have Tibbs for that long. And that very much struck me as, we barely got this guy. It's fine. Just trade him. Which a lot of teams sort of take that attitude. And Tibbs didn't look great in the early going last year. He didn't perform great. Dodgers haven't changed a lot. According to the Dodgers, the number one thing they said to him was just go back to hitting the way you did at Florida State, which is not, right? There's no devil magic there. Anybody could have told him that. Sometimes just go back to the way you hit when you were having a lot of success. With Harrison, the Brewers have made some adjustments to specific pitches and had him adding, I think they've added 1 pitch to the arsenal. So he is a bit different. But again, also, these are things any other club could have done. I was particularly surprised that Red Sox gave up on him, because I thought he was kind of the jewel in the crown of that trade for them, because they've had a lot of success developing young pitching over there, like Peyton Toll and Connolly Early, and now Anthony Anderson in their system have all gotten substantially better since the moment they joined the Red Sox. They didn't do that with Harrison. They didn't give him a lot of chance. And I know there's some regret over there at giving him up and seeing him have this kind of success right away. Is why couldn't we have done that? And I think you can ask the same question of the Giants. Why couldn't they have done that with Harrison or with Tibbs? So I think it's fair. There's a lot of hindsight involved in this, but it's also fair to question the whole sort of process going on around the Devers deal.
Keith, we really appreciate your time this morning.
Phenomenal.
I want to leave him with this one, though, because he mentioned it, and it's something we were talking about over the weekend, Joe, because they just had a series, Keith, obviously, against the A's. And you look it over with the Athletics, and they just have so much young talent there. And when you compare and contrast what they've done, and it's just kind of maddening from a Giants perspective, because it's just been such a dumpster fire from ownership with the A's. And yet, organizationally, when it comes to like player development, they just feel like they've always been a step ahead in their system with Forrest and Bean and what they've been able to do. And now they're starting to retain some of that talent with Soderstrom, with Jacob Wilson, and maybe Kurtz eventually. But why do the Giants just refuse to take a step back and just do an honest rebuild instead of just staying in this mired mediocrity of 81 and 81? They've been doing the same thing for 5 years. And I look at a team like the A's. I look at a team like even the White Sox, who we were all laughing at years ago, that did honest rebuilds. And now it's looking like it's paying off for them. Why do the Giants just refuse to take a step back for a couple seasons?
I think that's an ownership question. Like, I don't actually have an answer. I don't think there's ever been a point since that. What did they win that 1 year under Kapler?
107
or something.
Yeah, 107.
Yeah, that was close. Right. In some sense, having that and then, of course, getting nothing out of it in the playoffs, right, was almost the worst thing that could happen because it has felt, just an outsider perspective, like they've been trying to replicate that for a while now, as opposed to just saying that's not coming back. I mean, that's clearly not coming back at this point, and saying, okay, we have to actually tear this down a bit more and try to rebuild. Instead, it's been sort of patch. And I think that's top down. I think that's come from ownership. And it might be now ownership through Posey to the rest of the baseball staff. But that is very much the sense that I've gotten, that there's not a sense of we're able to rebuild. Now, they have the 4th pick in the draft this year. They're going to get a really good player. Regardless of what they do at that spot, they should, I guess I shouldn't say they are going to, they should get a really good player. And they got that extra pick in that Patrick Bailey trade, which I think is really significant. It's more significant than the prospect they got.
Well, is that going to help them? Is that going to help them maybe get this kid from UCLA? Because I follow college baseball. My nephew plays. There's no chance this guy falls then. Okay.
No, that's kind of not what the value of that pick is.
Okay.
I mean, Cholowski might not go. Rock Cholowski's the guy you're talking about. He may not go 1, but he could go 2 or 3. I cannot imagine he passes through 3 teams when he is pretty much the consensus best guy in the draft class. However, what I see, the depth of this draft class is in high school talent, particularly high school pitching, that would go typically in that sort of 25 to 45 pick range. And that's where they landed at 20. I think 29 is the pick that they got. And so now they have a pick in that ideal range, which gives them a lot of extra money to play with. And so they could potentially get a real first round talent at that next pick. They could go over slot because they have so much extra money. They can move money around from pick to pick and go get maybe one of the best high school pitching prospects in this draft class, just for example, which I would say don't take that guy at 4. That's way too high. But with your second pick at 29, absolutely, I would start investing in that. Or take a really good high school hitter at that spot too. They have an opportunity to add a lot of talent, particularly with those 2 picks in this draft. And given what's going on with the major league team, I would also say this is a really important one for them to get right.
Oh, God.
Keith, great stuff. We really appreciate it. If they make some significant moves toward the trade deadline, we'll definitely have you back on. But really, really good insight we're going to chew on for a while. Thank you so much.